to today's event, the evolution of project management from projects to products. I'm your host, Ellie Bowett. It's great to have so many of you joining us today. We're thrilled to have you with us as we explore one of the most important shifts happening in this profession. The way we deliver value in organizations is changing. The move from traditional project-based approaches to product-led methods is not just a trend, but a necessary adaptation to meet the evolving needs of businesses and customers. This shift challenges us to rethink how we approach delivery, how we structure our teams, and how we measure success. A key part of this evolution is the arrival of the new version of Agile project management. For over a decade now, the Agile Business Consortium's Agile PM has been a trusted framework for Agile delivery. And this latest version brings a fresh perspective, aligning even more closely with product-centric approaches. It introduces updated practices and tools to help project managers, product leaders, and organizations adapt to today's demands while continuing to deliver high-impact results. To guide us through today's discussion, I'm delighted to introduce our guest speaker, Paddy Dhanda, Agile Practice Director at QA. Paddy is a leading expert in Agile transformation, and he brings a wealth of experience and insight to this topic. Just before I hand over to him, let me tell you a little more about Paddy. He was formerly the head of Agile Learning for a global investment bank, where he successfully rolled out Agile education to over 100,000 Agilists worldwide. And with nearly 2 decades of experience in Agile practices, he's held roles such as Head of Business Analysis, Chief Product Owner, Agile Trainer, and Coach. In addition to his role at QA, Paddy is a guest lecturer at the University of Birmingham, where he teaches on the MBA program, and he frequently presents at conferences across the globe. He is passionate about creativity and visual thinking. Please do go and find Paddy on LinkedIn to see more of this. And he's also the host of the Superpowers School podcast, a platform dedicated to helping people develop the human skills they need to thrive in today's complex and ever-changing world. Paddy says he lives by Gandhi's mantra, the best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others. And with his deep expertise, real-world experience, and commitment to empowering others, Paddy is uniquely equipped to help us understand the implications of moving from projects to products, the role of frameworks like Agile PM in this shift, and what it all means for project managers. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Paddy Dhanda.
Oh, Ellie, thank you so much. It's such a privilege being here. Thank you, APMG, for the invite. And you've made me sound way better than I feel I am. So thank you for all the accolades. Really appreciate that. And so we were going to kick off, Ellie, with just sort of setting the scene, really, I think, because if we deep dive straight into the topic, I think, for the audience, it might be a little bit overwhelming. So I'm going to try and take it up a level to start with, and then we'll go in with some deeper questions, hopefully. So projects to products. This is a movement that was really started a few years ago, and there's a popular book by Mick Kirsten where he talks about this approach, where organizations are starting to shift their way of thinking. And I personally have seen this movement really taking flight over the last few years now, as more and more people are finding out about these ways of working, and we're starting to see a real shift now. And I would say, at scale, because it's not just 1 or 2 clients. I probably speak to at least 4 or 5 clients a week, and I would say at least half of them are talking about this shift. So it's great timing, I think. And talking about Mick Kirsten, he's, with his company, produced this report, which is the 2024 State of the Industry report, which is project to product. And they went out and explored lots of companies to try and understand, well, where are they in their maturity in terms of adopting this project to product sort of model. And what's really interesting is we're seeing a lot of people are in that sort of starting out phase and that experimentation phase. There is now, sort of 32% of organizations that are in that kind of expanding phase, but we're a long way away from where organizations are really operationalizing these approaches. So, it's a movement that I think is gaining traction, but we're not quite there yet, where it's becoming a mature practice for many organizations. And, working for QA, a learning organization, and in partnership with APMG, this is where we're really trying to help organizations take that next step and really start to mature these practices. Now, what's really interesting is in terms of the respondents within this survey, uh, sort of 50% forecast that in 5 years, so over 80% of their work will be product oriented. So that's a huge shift from today. So that's a 60% shift from where we are today. And in this presentation, I will be talking a little bit about AI, but I think AI is really going to accelerate that even further. Now, as a good product person myself, I have to do a lot of research in terms of understanding the trends and finding out what are people talking about on the internet. And we've been doing some research in terms of key terms that people are typing into Google. And we can see just here, this term of projects to products, it's really starting to gain traction even on Google, and people are really sort of starting to search for this term. It's becoming something that people are caring about. And as well as agile project manager, as a role, it's again, a huge amount of people are searching for this keyword, this set of keywords. And I think anyone that is a project manager or striving to become an agile project manager, that's music to your ears, because there's lots of demand in terms of this role, this skill set. And so for people that are making that shift, I think today's session is going to be really, really useful for you. I mentioned AI very briefly. So with any new technological advancement, whether it be the internet or when the iPhone was launched with apps, there's a big sort of experimentation phase initially where organizations want to just understand that technology, understand what it's about. Is it something that they could use in a positive way? Is it going to help them gain competitive advantage? And similarly, we're seeing that with AI as well at the moment. So, during the last couple of years, AI has started to hit the mainstream, but we're still in that experimentation phase, I would say, up until now. And it's almost like a Christmas gift that we were given when ChatGPT came along. It was a lovely present. We all played with it. It was like a toy. And now I think organizations are really starting to get serious about AI and seeing how it can really revolutionize their business and give them that competitive advantage. So this next phase is really the adoption phase. And I think from this year onwards, we're going to see a lot more traction in terms of that adoption for AI. And lots of people are talking about AI agents. And beyond that, some way into the future, we're going to really see AI fueled businesses. I mean, some people are even talking about an entirely AI driven organization where there'll be very little people in terms of effort, but the thinking behind the organization is what the humans will be responsible for. But that's way off into the future. Now, in terms of what does this mean for us in terms of project managers and agile project managers? Well, whenever organizations go through that adoption phase of any technology, as we know, there are lots of change programs, projects that need to be delivered. So as organizations start to see the effectiveness and the usefulness of AI, they will want to upgrade all of their internal tech platforms. And we've seen that AI impacts literally everything. So I believe and I predict that there's going to be a lot of work for change professionals in this next phase of AI. And we're going to see a lot of new products being launched as well, AI products. And that's where I think, this offering, the APMG's Agile PM, is super, super relevant and useful for that. But also just for us to understand this movement as well. I think it's a really great time for us to be thinking about projects to products. Now, often when I'm speaking to people, they'll say, well, what is a product? What do we mean by that? So here's just a very simple definition. There are other definitions out there, but I particularly like this one. So a product is an item or service that meets a customer's desire or solves a problem that they have. So you notice it's not always just a tangible product like a pen or an app. This can be a service as well. So, we see, for example, Airbnb. They don't deliver a tangible product as such as an organization. They're delivering the service of bringing people who are homeowners to people who are looking for holiday destinations and a place to stay. So they are delivering that service of bringing people together. That's their product. And when we think about products, typically product will go through a number of phases, and this is a classic sort of product life cycle that we often refer to. And whenever we launch a product, we'll have this initial development phase. We then have the introduction phase. Hopefully, if the product does well, we'll go into growth, maturity, and eventually the product may decline because it gets superseded by something else, or there's just no longer any need for that particular product. And in terms of the traditional approach to products, what we see is a initiative like this for a new product is often kicked off with a project. So somebody will have a great idea in an organization, and they will look to set up a project to start to deliver that particular initiative. And traditionally, what then happens is, as we go into that growth phase of that product, we may create more projects, and those allow us to add more features and really build up some of the capability within the product. And so we end up with lots of projects that are running over time, and eventually we may retire the product as well, and that is often triggered by a project. And that's really that traditional approach of dealing with products. And so if we think about, well, what are these two approaches, this project thinking approach versus product thinking? What are the key differences? Now, here's a really simplified view of that. So I know there are probably more nuances in the real world, but we're going to simplify it right down. So if anyone's sort of not come across this approach, hopefully you'll understand from here. So let's just look at project thinking for a moment. So imagine we have a product, and in this case, I'm just going to make one up. I've got a pen in my hand. Imagine our product is this pen. Now, a team will gather and they will become a project team to start to build this particular product. And in the project world, what might happen is that project that's been set up may also enable other change in the organization as well. So there could be other products that are going to get impacted by this particular project. And so the team is actually working across lots of different products. So they're not really focusing on one, they're really focused on the project as opposed to the product. So in a project thinking world, we have this model where we sort of put the project at the center of everything. Whereas in a product thinking world, it's slightly different. So the big difference here is we're simplifying the approach. So rather than having lots of different projects all running simultaneously, what we do is we align the teams to the products that we're delivering. So the people that are really good at building pens should be focused on this particular product. There's no point in assigning them lots of work to build other things if the thing that they're really good at and passionate about is this product. And so instead of having a project, we have this thing called a backlog. And the backlog is a huge list of features that we want to build at some point into this product. And those could come from lots of different trigger points. It could be from different projects that have amalgamated over time. Rather than having all those projects, we've amalgamated all those requirements into this single list. Now, what does that mean in terms of the two approaches? Well, if we just look at these 4 different dimensions, so we're going to look at sort of focus, time frame, success, and mindset. In no particular order here, really. So with the project thinking approach, we're usually delivering a specific output. So the project will have defined what that output is, and we will deliver that. And once we've delivered it, the project finishes. So in terms of the time frame, it has a fixed start date and a fixed end date. The success measures of a project are typically, did we deliver it on time? Did we deliver it on budget? And in terms of the mindset, I like to think of a project sometimes as renting a house. We rent this space for a period of time, after which we'll move on to the next house. So let's just flip that for a moment with the product thinking approach. Well, with products, what we're doing is the focus is on value. So rather than assuming that it has a fixed start and end time, this product is going to evolve over time. We're going to continuously improve it. We're going to continuously listen to our customers. We're going to listen to the users, and we're going to evolve the product. I mean, think of some of the products you use on a daily basis, and you'll see how true this is. So, for example, those of us that are Windows fans will know many years ago when Windows first came out, it was pretty basic. And now Windows has lots of features and capabilities. And that product has evolved over time. When they started Windows, I bet they didn't assume it had a fixed and an end time. The fact is, as the users have given feedback, we've had to evolve the product and to stay competitive as well. In terms of time frame, as I mentioned, products normally have this continuous evolution until we get to a point where somebody says, we're scrapping the product. It's no longer profitable, or for some other reason, it's been superseded by another product. Or perhaps we've decided to go into a completely different market, in which case that product's no longer relevant. And then in terms of success measures, it's really about customers and users. So I think one of the big differences here is, we are really focused on the end user and the end customer. Everything is about them, because imagine we've delivered a project, but nobody actually uses the product. Well, as project managers, we might well be celebrating to say, well, we met our on-time delivery. We delivered this thing to budget. But the fact is, nobody's using the product, in which case, was it a success? And so with the product thinking approach, we're really focused on that end customer to make sure we're always delighting those customers. And that mindset as well really shifts with a product thinking mindset. We're thinking about the long term. This isn't about short-term tactical wins. And as I mentioned, we obsess about the customer. They are the center of everything.
Brilliant. Thank you, Paddy. That was a really great introduction for our audience into the differences and the similarities between projects and products. And it's given us really valuable context for what we're going to do next. So we're going to move on now to dive into some key questions that I know our audience will be keen to explore. So starting off with this foundational question really for today's discussion, Paddy. While product-led approaches are gaining momentum, and we heard obviously that we're at the beginning of this in your opinion, do you think there are cases where traditional projects still have a place?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I'm not here to advocate that we need to stop using projects by any means. Absolutely not. I think, every situation demands a different solution, and products are really relevant when we're in this situation of continuously having to evolve it, where we need constant change. Whereas a project, as I mentioned, it has this set fixed start date and end date, and so I think it really depends on the situation. Now, some examples of where projects are absolutely imperative. We think about regulatory initiatives. I don't know about you, Ellie, but when GDPR came along and we were all told we have to adhere to these policies. With GDPR, typically it had a defined date by which we needed to make those changes. And so organizations had to be compliant. I've worked for a big bank in the past, and again, lots of regulation comes out and we're given these sort of deadlines by which we need to be compliant. And so for those sort of initiatives, projects are absolutely relevant. I mean, I can't see us constantly evolving the GDPR rules. We either meet them or we don't at that point in time. So we have to use projects in those situations. Other things like office relocations. I mean, if an organization is moving their headquarters to another location, again, it's a project. We're going to be setting up, all the good practices around a project to make sure we get people into the new building within a certain time frame. We probably won't be evolving that any further than that. So again, projects are super, super relevant. Um, Even mergers and acquisitions, as organizations partner with another organization, they will be looking to get that done within a certain time frame. And again, the success measure of that is, did it happen on time? Did we meet the deadline? And then I guess even products often get triggered by a project. So the role of projects are super relevant, even in the product world. I mean, I know I've talked about kind of those differences, but often the trigger point for a new product is a project. And just to lay down the infrastructure needed for a new platform can often be a project, because the infrastructure may then stay stable. There may not be any change. So, for example, if we need multiple platforms internally, or apps to talk to one another, once those have been configured, the piping's been built to connect them together, we're probably not going to change that much. But what we are going to change are all of the messages that go between those different systems. And that's where the product approach will then take over, because if we need to evolve that over time, we can start to use some of that thinking.
Yeah, that makes total sense. As with so many things, Paddy, it's not about one or the other. It's about using the right approach for the right, situation, and being able to identify which is which I think is, so many of our project managers kind of are already dealing with that, with, which approach to use, which framework to use for which project. So that makes total sense. Moving on then, so the shift has sparked concern amongst project managers. Do you believe that frameworks like Agile PM, the new version, can offer a way to ensure their roles remain relevant and valuable in a product-led environment?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we look at a lot of roles, not just project management, but other roles out there, even the roles that we've had to do over time, evolve. And they evolve because of many reasons. We're almost products ourselves. We may have done things very differently 10 years ago to what we do them now. And just a great example of that is obviously lockdown and COVID, and how that's completely changed the way we work. But what we've done is we've evolved. We've evolved to meet the challenges that we were faced with. And I think project managers are in that exact same boat at the moment. Obviously, AI is going to really change that role. But as we see more and more organizations going down this product-led approach, I think project managers will have to evolve in terms of just some of the behaviors. So one of the really great things about, I think, the new product, the APMG Agile PM product, is it's introduced these 9 leadership sort of principles. And I think just looking at those, for me, was music to my ears, because we're now starting to talk about project leadership as opposed to pure project management. And what does that mean? Well, we're all leaders in some way or other. And as project people, rather than trying to take an approach of command and control, where you have a team and you can manage that team, we have to influence more and facilitate conversation. And I think that's quite a shift in terms of some of the more traditional approaches. I know project managers are great at facilitating generally, but I think making it a real focus and part of the DNA of the role, I think is great to see from my perspective. So I think the role absolutely is shifting. It's not always just about having a plan and trying to follow that plan. We've got to think about in a complex world, there are lots of new challenges we've got to deal with, and some of those traditional methods aren't going to be as relevant. And so we've got to evolve ourselves and our skill set. So facilitation, I would say, is a critical skill, a critical human skill as well. So even when AI does start to take over a lot of the mundane stuff that we do. Facilitating connection and human relationships, I think, is going to be one of the critical skills of the future. And project managers are well equipped for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, what a great example of a product evolving, the new version of Agile PM arriving after 10 years. And for those of you watching today, we will share an email after this session with how you can kind of sign up and hear more about new version of Agile PM and how you can get involved in it. Okay, moving on. Paddy, real world examples, real life success stories often provide the best learning opportunities. So can you share an example of a transformation you were involved in, maybe how frameworks like Agile PM contributed to its success?
Yeah, I'm going to show my age a little bit now, but one of my early roles was working for British Telecom. And it was a place where I started as a young graduate many years ago. And BT was owned by the government previously, and it was part of the post office, and then it became a privatized organization. And when I joined BT at the time, it was a very different organization to what it is now. Our core product was selling telephone lines, and that was our core business at the time. Now, a few years into my career there, we had a new CIO come in, and he wanted us to change the ways of working. He didn't use this word agile, even though agile had been around for about 3 or 4 years at that time, which I thought was a really smart move from a leader, because what we found at the time were we had over 4,000 projects all running simultaneously. And most of the time, those projects would be delayed or sometimes even scrapped because we weren't quick enough to evolve those projects. I think we just didn't have modern techniques and modern approaches at the time to be able to deal with that. At best, we might release software once a year, but more often than not, it got delayed. And one of the great things about the approach that they used at BT at the time was, rather than saying everyone needs to go agile, the sort of the messaging from the top was, we need to deliver faster. And we need to deliver more frequently. And at the time, this is the early 2000s, we were told we have to deliver something every 90 days. That's 3 months. Now, by today's standards, that's a huge window, right? People today would say, well, 90 days, that's not very agile at all. Well, back then, it was earth-shattering, because we were going from 12 months to 3 months, and that was a huge, huge difference. And so every team had to figure out how they were going to do that. And for many of those teams, agile became the de facto way to do that. And I'm not saying it all went smoothly. We had lots of challenges along the way. But what we found was, as more and more teams were following this product approach, there needed to be governance. We needed to have good, strict controls. Otherwise, it could be like the wild, wild west, where everybody goes off and does their own thing. And so really, that kind of project management skill set was absolutely critical to that, because it helped glue together a lot of the dependencies across those teams, those risks that they were sort of coming up against. Somebody need to manage those. And for teams to work at that speed, we need a great resourcing plan. We need people to be, looking at the resourcing. We need the infrastructure to be built in time as well, which all require projects and the project management approach. And so at BT, we had a really strong project management presence at the time. And I think that was definitely critical to have that. But then just some of that product thinking approach as well, delivering things frequently and having people involved in the process all the way through as well was critical.
Yeah, thanks, Paddy. That's a great experience to share with us. So moving on then to what didn't go so well during that time. You said that it came with its challenges. Tell us about a time when it didn't work out as expected and some of the lessons that you learned from that.
Yeah, I mean, I've been involved in many failures, by the way, so I don't claim to be sort of, a shining star when it comes to agile. Probably the most famous one, and probably the most famous on the planet, if I'm honest. I was involved with Universal Credit, so the UK government's sort of flagship agile program at the time, and this is during my time in consulting. And we had lots of different suppliers all working on this program. So we had the big consultancies there, all sort of working on this. And the program was initially budgeted at around £2 billion. Well, very quickly, the budget ballooned to around 15 billion. So that's a huge difference right there. So when it comes to budgeting, it wasn't done probably that well. But in terms of what led to some of the challenges we had, well, I'd say culture was a big part of it. So we had some thought leaders who wanted us to be more agile, but the wider teams and the wider organization didn't quite have that culture embedded within their sort of thinking. And I think we had this kind of clash of cultures, the more traditional thinking versus the product approach. And it really, came to a head because we were trying to aim for speed and we'd want answers quickly because otherwise we can't get the products out there fast enough. Well, the people giving us the answers weren't prepared to give those because they had never worked in this way before and it felt very chaotic. So that was just one of the issues, I think, in terms of the communication, the culture. And I think the leadership at the time as well, they really didn't probably demonstrate as many of those agile leadership principles as they could have. It was almost felt that if we just ask the teams to do this, they'll get it done somehow. But the leaders need to be driving that change as well. And I think, again, going back to kind of project management, good project management discipline would have been really useful because everybody was working in different ways. All the suppliers were kind of using their own approaches, whereas having some standardization, I think, would have been really, really useful in that. Now, this case study, it's documented in the public domain. So if anyone is looking to go deeper on that, feel free to Google universal credit and agile, and you'll find lots of articles on that. Now, I know now they're in a much better sort of place, and things changed and evolved. But when I was involved, certainly we had lots of those challenges around that culture shift. And I think even organizations today, I've worked with startups, we see this everywhere. People often say, well, Google do things brilliantly, we should follow what Google do. Well, even Google have their problems. I've got friends who have been agile coaches at Google, and some of the horror stories you hear in certain parts of these high-tech organizations, they're also struggling with that culture as well. So I think it is something that's really difficult even for the cool tech organizations out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, Paddy, we've got live questions flying in left, right, and centre. So, the last question from me before we open up to our audience. So, what practical steps can project managers take to ensure they are ready for this shift? How can they leverage frameworks like Agile PM, for example, to kind of try and stay ahead and add value?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm biased because I work in the learning industry, but I think learning is more important now than ever. We sort of see technological advancements happening so fast. There's a new app out every other week. When we look at AI, just looking at DeepSeek, which is one of the new language models that were launched recently. They've overtaken ChatGPT, and now everybody's trying to figure out how to use that particular app. So I think lifelong learning is a superpower that we all need to embrace in some way or other. So I would say, first thing is product literacy. Really, understanding, well, when someone's talking about products and product thinking, like, what do those terms mean? When they talk about these things called backlogs and, doing all of the different ceremonies that we do in a framework like Scrum, because the new Agile PM framework utilizes the Scrum approach, although you can use others. But really understanding that language. And when we talk about sort of, value and value focused sort of benefits and success factors, what do those mean? When we talk about, those different metrics for products, do we all understand? And are we speaking the same language? So I think the literacy is super, super important. And I would say, speaking to other project managers that are out there already in this space, I think that's going to really help as well. Hearing their experiences of that transition going into this kind of more product focused approach. Speak to product managers. Product managers live and breathe these approaches every day. Understand how you can help them, because there needs to be a real partnership between project management and product management as well. I see a lot of articles on social media where there's this sort of seems to be a bit of a battle between, should we have project managers? Are they, should we have product managers? Which one should we have? And in my view, we need both. Product managers are focused on getting this product to market. They build insights about the product. They, really understand the demand for the product. Whereas to get that out into the big wide world, we need project management skill sets. And I believe project management skill as a skill set, it's embedded into lots of roles. Just because your title doesn't say you're a project manager, this skill set should be part of, I think, everyone's DNA. So it's super important that we learn these skills. Really focus on things like governance. What does that mean? What are some of the governance frameworks that are going to help in a product environment? Going back to the example of universal credit, I think the budgeting cycles and the budgeting process really wasn't compliant within a product focused environment. So I think that was one of the other reasons why that program really struggled. So just really sort of immersing yourself, I think, in that world, and join meetups and groups, and start to immerse yourself with the community of other product people, so that you can start to live and breathe what they go through.
Perfect. Thanks, Paddy. That's great. We have a plethora of live questions pouring in from our audience, so we'll go now to some of those live questions. So the first one here: is there one team working on the backlog, or can you have multiple teams? In your Windows example, the product team is made up of a large number of teams who specialize in different features.
Yeah. So, this really talk about scaling, because you can have, simple, small products that are dealt with by one team. But as we have large platforms, then we need multiple teams working on that platform. Now, it's really down to the organization to define what they mean by a product, because within Windows, I'm sure there are lots of products that are contained within the operating system, and so they may well have one product manager who is responsible for the profit and loss of that overall product. But actually, within there are lots of smaller products that make up Windows. So each of those products would typically have a backlog, and I've personally found it best where you have one team to one backlog. It just makes things a lot easier to manage. That's not to say you can't do it that way, but my personal experience has always been, if you have that one team focused on the backlog for the product, they are then taking ownership of that. It's their accountability. Whereas when you have lots of teams all focused on that one backlog, then sometimes we could pass the buck. Not to say that we should, but we don't, I believe, have as much ownership then. So yeah, it just really depends on your organization. But some of the larger platforms will absolutely have multiple teams having multiple backlogs. Now, some of the scaling frameworks, the way they do this is they would have a kind of a superset of items on a backlog, and then that backlog is broken down into smaller team backlogs. So that's another way of handling that. You can sort of start to break your high-level initiatives down into smaller backlogs, which are all still part of the same platform.
Great, thank you. And thank you, Sinead, for your question. Moving on then, next question is, do we have benefits realization in product thinking?
All the time, absolutely. So if we think about, let me take my job as an example. So I'm responsible for the Agile portfolio at a training company. So my job is very much about bringing new products to market, new courses to market. And if I keep churning out new products into the market, but they're not selling very well, then I'm pretty sure someone along the line is going to ask me questions. we're spending all of this money working on these products, but we're not getting the return on those. And so, in the product thinking world, you relentlessly focus on those benefits all the time, because it's a bit like music, right? You're only as good as your last hit. So the fact that you've launched a whole bunch of products in the past, they might be really profitable, but as soon as one kind of is a bit of a flop, people are going to ask a lot of questions. So constantly I'm talking to our learners. I'm looking at our dashboards, seeing where the revenue is, really trying to understand why certain products aren't selling. How can we get those sales up? And that's all part of that product thinking approach. It's really understanding, do people really want this? And if not, then why not? And then at some point, somebody has to take a call and say, well, maybe we need to retire certain products because they're just not selling. And every product we launch is more operational cost for the business. Somebody needs to do the marketing, that's effort. Somebody needs to be able to train it. So they have to constantly keep their skills relevant. That requires time and effort. So there's a huge investment in each product. And if they're not delivering those benefits, then we've got to question why we're doing them.
Thanks, Paddy. Next question, please. Okay, so are there areas or functions within an organization where you might not choose to go the product route or would prefer projects?
Yeah, great question, Geeta. So as I mentioned earlier, where we know there's a sort of fixed start date and an end date. So if something is done once we've delivered it, and we know we don't need to continuously evolve it, or at least in the immediate term, then that's typically well suited to be a project. In some cases, we've seen products that they won't have much change. So mature processes. Say, for example, we're building a bridge, right? We've built bridges everywhere. We're really good at building bridges. We're experts at building bridges. Well, bridge, does it need to be a product? No, because again, it has a fixed start date and a fixed end date, but also because we have the skills to do it, and there's not that much change that's going to go on. We know, based on the blueprint, the requirements that we're going to have for that bridge, it's not going to change all that much. So what I've seen is some organizations, when they're even building digital products and apps, if the team feel that it's a process that isn't going to change that much, they've done it 100 million times before, then for them, they might well run it as a project, and that's perfectly fine. But I think where the product thinking approach really works is where we have lots of complexity, there's lots of change, there's uncertainty, then having this other approach, which is these short, sharp, small iterations, and we continuously evolve based on feedback. And it's almost that kind of learning, having those quick cycles of learning allow us to evolve the product and move in the right direction. And the only way we can do that is by really listening to our customers and users. So that's where product thinking, I think, is a really powerful approach.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much. Another question, please. Okay, so would product thinking not devolve into operationalizing projects? Every project delivers into an operation most of the time.
Oh, let me just digest that question.
Just unpack that one a bit.
Operationalizing projects. Not sure I quite understand the question, Mo, but let me just have a go. So, as I mentioned, typically when we're going to launch a new initiative, and it could be a product, we're going to kick it off with a project, and that's going to require all the good things that we'd have in a project. We're going to have governance. We're going to have regular steering committees. All of those good things that make sure we have real good governance. But eventually, we're going to move that project into that kind of growth phase. And in order to grow the product, it needs a different approach. It needs for us to be really close to the customer. It means we need to really focus on that product rather than moving around and working on lots of different projects all at the same time. really get that team to focus on that product, because that's the best possible chance of success when people are focused and they take ownership of that product. And so that's when we start to move into that product mode, and teams can then, like I said, work on it without distraction, and the agile PM sort of approach enables that, because it has this sort of initial phase of feasibility. Let's just make sure what we're going to build here is the right thing. So there's some upfront project thinking around that. We look at the solution as well that we're going to be using for this. So there's some legwork that we're doing up front. But then at some point, we're going to go into the product approach of Scrum. And so we're going to have these short iterations, and it's going to then continuously evolve over time. And that's where we marry up those two approaches, and they work magically when people adopt these practices in the right way. So yeah, I don't know if I've answered the question at all there, but that's kind of my view.
We hope we've answered the question for you, Mo. Let's move on to the next question. Okay, how does shifting from project-based to product-based management impact traditional project management roles?
Yeah, I mean, again, just going back to sort of the leadership approaches, I think that's one big shift. Typically when you're leading a project in the past, I don't think the first slide on those training courses was around your leadership style. It was probably more focused on the deliverables and some of the processes that we need to adopt. Well, in Agile PM, and I have the manual here in front of me, within sort of the first 50 pages, we're talking about leadership styles, and I think that's super critical. So if we're going to be adopting this approach, leadership is super important. Even in some of those examples I mentioned, where we've either had success or failure, it's usually been where the leadership haven't quite been moving in the right direction. When I look at a lot of the insights reports around why do agile transformations fail, for example, the number one reason nearly always is a lack of leadership support. And so for me, that's great to see here. The fact that we're really focused on leadership, as I mentioned, in the human side of project management. So for me, that is a big shift.
Yeah.
That's been a huge shift. How do we work better with people? How do we sort of live and breathe those principles as well? And there's a huge emphasis on communication as well, the different types of communication. So I think that's going to be a big shift. And the final one I'm going to mention here is, again, in the manual, we get introduced to a lot of product roles, and there are lots of product roles. I look at these every day and I get amazed, but we have design thinkers out there, product designers, we have product owners, product managers, business analysts, UX people. All of these are product roles. And again, within Agile PM, there's some real great guidance around, well, as a project manager, how do you work with all of these different people? And there's a real emphasis on that. So when I talked about kind of product literacy, it's, you may not be used to working with those roles in a more traditional approach. And so we're now being introduced to, this terminology, and we get some empathy around, how these people work, what do they deliver, so that we can partner with them in the right way.
Brilliant. Thanks, Paddy. We've got tons and tons of live questions stacking up, so we'll rattle through as many as we can before the end of the show, and then we'll try and get you answers, folks, to the questions that we don't have time to get to today. But let's move on to the next one. Change management. What role does change management play in this transformation, Paddy?
Right. Again, I'm going to talk about my example on my sort of in my world where I'm launching products on a daily basis. Whenever we're working on a new initiative, for me, change management is absolutely critical. So in terms of understanding risks, assumptions, all of those good things that good change management practices would enable us to do, it's imperative. So it's not just a simple case of having some great ideas, hoping the team are going to build those, and hopefully we'll get something out the door. We're constantly planning and replanning all of the time when we're working in this sort of product approach. Somebody once said to me, "Oh, this agile approach or whatever, it doesn't require you to have a plan. Well, let's just break that down. Within this product world, we have potentially multi-year milestones, right? So we have a roadmap that spans multiple years. So that's an element of planning right there. Well, within that, we'll have roadmaps that define releases of the product. And those are over multiple months. And then we also have a roadmap of iterations. And so an iteration can be anything from 2 to 4 weeks. So we're planning at that level. And then we have our daily check-ins, or the daily scrums, as they're called in Scrum. And that's where we're planning and replanning on a daily basis. So all of your change management skills, really making sure that we're doing things in the right way, identifying those risks, those all come into play, even in this product world. And I think they are absolutely critical. And then when we're launching the product, really understanding, well, what does it mean for the people? How are we going to get this out the door? Are people going to embrace this product in the right way? Well, what can we do from a change management perspective to make sure people are ready for the change? Especially in a tech world, if we're launching some new AI capability, just hoping people are going to start using it is not enough. So how do we get those people engaged early on? How do we make sure we meet them where they are in terms of their knowledge? So, good change management practice, I think, is absolutely critical.
Brilliant. Thanks, Paddy. Another live question, please. Okay. Is the first part of a product being created done through a project activity, and what are the alternatives?
Oh, nice question. Well, again, lots of frameworks have different approaches. And so I personally try not to get hung up on it has to be this way or this way. There are frameworks out there. I'll just name one, for example, SAFe, Scaled Agile Framework. They have a slightly different approach. What they will do is they will have these sort of strategic initiatives that come in from the top, and those break down into, you could say, sort of program level items on a backlog. Agile PM has a slightly different approach, and we have this kind of pre-project phase where we're looking at, is this a good idea? Should we even be doing this? But then we go into kind of the project mode from then onwards, really. And so I would say it really just depends on which approach you're adopting, and which framework you're looking at will determine that. So definitely, by no means is it just one way or the other.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Paddy. That's great. So that was the last question we've got time for today, I'm afraid. We have got a ton stacking up, so we will attempt to get some answers and get them out to our audience. We will certainly provide you with some more content on Agile PM, the 9 principles that Paddy has been talking about, and what you need to do to find out more about that. So thank you so much, Paddy, for sharing your experience and insight with us today. Your expertise and perspective on Agile transformation and the updated Agile PM framework, it's been incredibly valuable, and we've really enjoyed having you. We could have talked for another hour, I think, but maybe we'll have to reschedule that and come back another day. And to everyone in our audience, thank you for being part of today's session. I hope you're walking away with some actionable ideas and fresh inspiration to take back to your teams and your organizations. If you would like to continue this conversation, Paddy and I would be very happy to connect with you after the event. So please do go and find us on LinkedIn and kickstart that conversation. And if you enjoyed today's session and you'd like to hear more from APMG, you can join us for some upcoming events. So you can join us tomorrow, in fact, for the next episode in our APMG Partner Spotlight session, which is What is the Half Double Methodology, where we welcome the Half Double Institute to tell you all about how you can improve your project success. And next week, we'll be bringing you Beyond Boundaries, Empowering People and Elevating Impact in 2025, a look at how organizations make people feel and the impact that that has on your business. So we look forward to welcoming you back for these events. Head over to our website for details on how to register, and join us on YouTube, subscribe to our channel to see all of our past and future events. Until then, thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.